Hi, welcome to Visual Studio Toolbox. I'm your host, Robert Green, and joining me today are two-thirds of the C-suite of the Uno platform. My good friends Jerome Laban, the CTO of Uno, and Francois Tanguay, the CEO. Hi, guys. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Hi, Robert. Good to see you again.
And I know we've covered Uno a couple times before in the show, but you guys have just released 4.0. You've got a lot of announcements, and there's excitement, and there's new stuff to cover, and that's what we're going to do today. So let's start out with a short overview of what the Uno platform is, and then we can dive into all the cool new stuff.
Sure, maybe I can take that. So you're right. 2 weeks ago now already. It feels like a year, but we've shipped our latest release 4.0 of the Uno platform. And in a nutshell, for those viewers that might have missed some of the previous episodes as to what Uno is in the first place and why we created it, Uno platform is a cross-platform UI framework that allows you to bring WinUI technology to all of the other platforms out there. So basically, you can run a WinUI code base with your XAML and C# running on top of .NET 6 to all of the other operating systems. Should be in a browser using WebAssembly, on iOS and Android devices, on Linux now with our Skia backend, and even on Android, obviously. So you can pretty much run everywhere from a single code base, which maximizes reuse.
So then it's kind of, again, it's kind of similar. It's kind of a similar concept to what Xamarin's doing. You're right. Xamarin Forms is doing. You're right. XAML, and then you compile it into a native Windows app, Android, iOS. You're also doing Blazor and WebAssembly, and you just said you're doing Skia. So that's at the highest level. That's a correct statement, right?
Yeah, it is building native apps, slightly different from Blazor. So we are leveraging everything .NET offers. So we're leveraging the .NET WebAssembly runtime, the same way we're using the .NET runtime on Linux and iOS and Android. So what used to be Xamarin Classics, that is now part of .NET with .NET 6 for iOS and Android, that's what we're building on top of, but with a unique spin on the XAML language that the WinUI team offers.
Okay, so whereas Xamarin Forms uses the Xamarin variant of XAML, yes. You guys are using the WinUI variant of XAML. They're not exactly the same, but they're pretty darn similar. If you can learn one XAML, you can learn them all.
Yeah, the same way if you're coming from a WPF background, they feel pretty similar, right? So what differentiates us really are the target platform, the fact we can run on Linux and on the web as well.
Cool. All right, good overview. Now, on to what's new.
Yeah. So 4.0 is probably our biggest release so far. Like I would imagine I've been saying that for every single release.
It's the biggest release since the last release.
Exactly. But we took, it has a different feel to it. So whereas before on Uno, we were primarily focused on the core offering of the UI framework and making sure that it would run pixel perfect on all the other platforms, on all the various platforms we have. We decided basically to go one step higher in the food chain and solve some of the problems that we had been solving internally at Inventive, our parent company, and basically solve for problems and questions that people would ask day one when they start using Uno, right? Okay, great, you have a UI framework. Now what? How do I build an app? How can I deal with navigation or state management in my app? Which dependency injection framework can I use? And all of these different considerations that we want to solve for and offer some guidance as to how you should bootstrap an app and how it should be structured from an architecture standpoint, and then also fill some of the gaps on the tooling side. So basically, before 4.0, all you had but like what Uno consisted of is the UI framework that would run cross-platform. Mm-hmm. Plus, we had shipped already with our themes package that would allow you to get a design system, either Material, Cupertino, or Fluent, running everywhere as well. So you didn't have just a blank app without any design systems to it. You could use and leverage one of these well-known design systems across all platforms to get you started. What we're adding on top of that, on top of themes now, is what we call extensions. So like basically replicating the ASP.NET hosting extensions model, but by also adding all of the various cross-cutting concerns that you have in your apps with logging, with serialization, with making HTTP with REST over JSON, JSON over REST API calls, with like all these considerations that you have from day one when you're trying to build a mobile app or a desktop app that connects to a server. Like, how am I going to deal with all this? Well, now we're shipping all of these extensions as part of our standard Uno template, really to get you going. So this is, if you want, for the extension side of it, but we figured like that we had other pieces that we were using internally, and in a cross-platform world where you have various form factors with desktop on one side, with and web, obviously landscape form factors, but also with mobile scenarios as well. Some controls that weren't part of WinUI or even the Windows Community Toolkit, we figured we could provide as well, so that you could solve for those mobile friendly scenarios as well. So we came up with navigation bars, with tab bars, with all the missing controls that you might need on mobile that weren't there in the desktop flavor of Windows UI.
Cool.
If Windows Phone was still a thing today, probably you would have those controls baked into WinUI, but we decided to bring back some of these considerations and concepts so that you could really build an app cross-platform, but also that is fully adaptive and responsive. And then, so that's it for, like, if you wish, the toolkit. Tools I'll let Jerome talk about, because we've shipped quite a few tools on our IDE integration side of it. And finally, Figma, if I was to visit Figma directly, is we figured that like the biggest pain we have day in, day out as an app builder, first and foremost, is the design handoff, right? How can a design team can imagine something, and how painful it is to do that formal handoff of providing design Figma files with red lines where a developer then needs to open them, look at the margins, figure out the stylings, the colors, the font sizes, and implement that in C# or XAML for it to be reliable in terms of pixel perfection between the design and the actual development of it. Right?
So what exactly is Figma?
Yeah, Figma is a design tool. It's the most popular design tool out there. It's similar to Adobe XD and Sketch, and that's a tool that's widely adopted in the community. And once a designer creates it's similar in a sense to what Microsoft shipped 14 years ago with Expression Blend, right? Where you're able to create high fidelity design documents that would eventually be structured and capable of being parsed to a certain extent. And what we did is, by integrating in that design tool the same way we could have integrated in Adobe Photoshop maybe many years ago, but now that design tools allow for plugin architectures and all that, what we did is integrate into Figma to parse basically all of the design document and generate the output being an Uno app, right? So we're generating XAML. We could be generating C# as well, but we're generating the UI layer of your app by parsing your Figma document.
Oh, that is cool. And what's the tooling you use for that?
So we're integrating directly into Figma as a design tool, and we've created an Uno for Figma plugin, and also provided a UI component library that allows you to like create designs with all the WinUI widgets, as if you were drag and dropping components directly from your Visual Studio toolbox, right? So on a design surface, but you're doing that into a tool that's familiar to designers. And out of that, we're able to extract all the data and generate 100% of your XAML so that you can get to focus on your business logic and creating your app, as opposed to trying to come up with XAML that resembles somehow the design.
So this is the kind of the next iteration in the idea that we developers are going to be able to use a fancy design tool and generate our UI.
Yeah, so that's the idea of like the well-known. Well, so we're trying to find that middle ground, right? Because obviously you don't want to provide something that's too opinionated in terms of app frameworks and MVVM patterns and navigation, because then you're narrowing down the selection of who would care about this. But if you're just generating the UI layer, it tends to be quite decoupled from all of your business logic and presentation logic. And this way, we think you can save tons of time by just getting XAML for free out of your design documents, and then maybe you want to tweak them slightly.
Good questions on the chat, and there's someone that says, when I did WPF, I found out that the layout became too static, and that's not something that will happen there, because Figma is all about reactive, responsive designs. So So it's not put a pixel. It's not the canvas where you draw stuff on it. It's more responsive than that.
Yeah, there's a core concept nowadays in most design platforms. The idea of like responsive layouts in Figma, it's called the auto layout container or control, and that's clearly meant to design and then develop adaptive and responsive designs. And that's something it's similar to Flex in terms of language, in terms of capabilities and all that. And we made sure to support that in order for these designs to be as adaptive and responsive as well, for sure.
Okay. Well, Digital Electronics knows about it. Well done.
Good for you.
Well done.
You're prime for it, that's for sure.
All right. Time for some demos.
Yeah, Jerome, maybe you want to show some of the tools we've been building.
Yeah, sure. So let me share it quickly. I think I removed that. So let's take a look at, so we've been adding support for a few things. Well, the first one is the support for Visual Studio Code. So that's one of the new cool things that we added. A lot of people are asking for support for Visual Studio Code for various reasons. The first one is, they're accustomed to it and they like working on it even on Windows and maybe not wanting to use Visual Studio. And so it's an extension that we provide as part of the marketplace. So it's installed as any other type of extension, and it relies on C# support for that comes from OmniSharp. So it's the C# support that you guys are providing at Microsoft. And we're sitting on top of this to provide a certain set of features. And then on the side, we're providing additional things like support for code completion. So let's say, for instance, I have my text block here. I can do completion. So I have all sorts of properties that are available. So all that is powered by Roslyn. So we're using Roslyn to parse the that's interesting.
Let's not do that now.
Not now. So we're using Roslyn underneath. So we're parsing the project and we're parsing the XAML and then providing an actual representation of everything that can be used in the context of XAML. So at that location, we know that all those properties and events are available. And we're going down to the specifics. So for instance, if I say I want to change the vertical alignment, for instance, I can give the tooling is going to provide you the exact properties that are available for that property. And this is not something that is completely static. So if you define your own enum or something, or whichever that exists, then it's going to be available. And the cool thing is that Roslyn also works with non-compiled code. So if you haven't built your application, it's going to be available as well. So that's the type of things that are very nice with Roslyn. And so I have the application running here on the side. So this is a small application that is coming. I just created using .NET New. So let me. Oh yeah, I can't put it because the screen is so big that it can't move so lower. Okay, so that's what it looks like. So I have. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, fiddling with the position of things around. There you go. Okay, so that's what we have. So we have the tooling installed. We have a new application available here. So it looks like this. We have all the files available there, and then I have my page at the back. So we have the XAML and then the code behind file, and we even got to integrate things like go to code behind file. So if I click here, it opens the C# file that's associated to the XAML file. So the small things like this that make the navigation easier to go with. So the interesting thing here is that I can make some modifications directly here. So if I change my file, so I just say hello world, then the content's going to update right away. So that's hot reload features that we added there. But we didn't stop there. So we added a few other things like, let's say, for instance, if I add a new button here, and let's say I say my content that's Toolbox, and then I do this. So if I save, my button's going to appear and it's going to do nothing. But the cool thing is that we can start adding stuff there. So with Roslyn, again, it's not just about enumerating properties. It's also about enumerating functions. So we can also see, for instance, when I do an Xbind on my event that's clicked here, which are the methods that are available in my context that I can call using this. And one of the ones that is interesting is the on my button here. So if I add this and save, then if I click, I do hello on click. And this one is something I added in the back here, which is I said text box 1 text equals this. So it changes the text over there. We didn't stop there. We also went to this. And this is the new stuff that came in with Visual Studio for .NET 6, which is the C# hot reload. And that is pretty cool because now you're inside Visual Studio, and then you can change your C# and then get things happen when you anyway. I just saved, and then it updated automatically. And I can even go and do things like this. ToString. Save, and then I have the date happening and appearing there. So I can do a mix of C# hot reload and XAML hot reload when running inside of Visual Studio Code here. So that's pretty cool. It's something that we ended up being able to integrate inside of VS Code. It's we basically integrated with what the .NET team has been creating with what is called metadata updates. So it's all about the Roslyn compiler that determines what needs to be changed and then pushes it over to the browser, and then the browser the runtime in the browser just updates what's running and then gives you something like this where you get new content appearing. So it makes for some very cool scenarios, like let's say if you're doing some Skia rendering, so you're manipulating shapes and things like that, and then you can change your running application that updates per frame, and then your code changes right away without having to rebuild everything and start again. That's the very cool part, because when I started working on this, the amazing part of this is the time it takes for the compiler to see the changes. It takes, when I change something here and I press save, it takes 63 milliseconds to recompile all the changes for the app and then push them to the other side. So yeah, it's quite amazing what the .NET team has done. So we got to integrate all that for the Uno developers that want to use it.
Cool.
So yeah, and what Jerome isn't saying here, Robert, is because we've created this extension with XAML and C# hot reload, with XAML and C# code completion being bootstrapped, or what's called IntelliSense in VS. Because it's running on VS Code, it's running on VS Code not only on Windows, but also on Mac. It's running also on Linux. Jerome, during UnoConf, he showed VS Code running on a Raspberry Pi, making modifications to a Linux targeted Uno platform, right? Which was pretty amazing. Yeah. And because, if I'm not mistaken, because VS Code also runs as code spaces in the browser, we're now able to run the same extension in the browser. So you can use a web IDE to review code, to modify code, to sit in action in a web browser as well. So it's pretty an interesting scenario. And something we shared, we call this internally hot reviews. So if you're building a desktop app and you're pushing a PR to your colleagues in the cloud on GitHub, you can now open that PR, hot reload it, see it in action in a web preview or a web target, and you're able to make modifications to it with IntelliSense or code completion and hot reload, and confirm that those changes make sense, or validate some of your assumptions that you might have regarding those changes, and therefore provide more valuable feedback to your PR, right?
And what I'm showing now is exactly this. So the same thing that I was showing in a Visual Studio Code that's running locally on my machine. So that's a local Visual Studio, and that one is a code spaces environment where the same code runs, but completely in code spaces. You can see here that it's saying code spaces. So for those who don't know what code spaces is it's a pretty much a development environment on demand. So you don't need to install anything up front. Everything is available, and then you can install your VS Code extensions there. So that's our Uno platform extension that gets installed directly inside of the Visual Studio environment there. And you can have multiple environments. You don't need to install anything on your machine. When you start working on one of your machine, then you can go develop on your iPad if you want. That's the kind of things that is available when developing with Codespaces, and it's pretty powerful because it's the same kind of development environment here. You can get the same thing here with the code completion feature that we added for Visual Studio, but it's the same kind of feature available. So let's say if I add the same thing here with a click, and I do the Xbind feature again with the onClick, which it's not exactly the same sentence. And if I click here, let me restart that one. If I wait a bit, then sometimes it just stops. So if I do that update here, I'm going to do VS Toolbox here. So if I click the button, then it updated, and then same thing happens. So we're completely in the web. We haven't had anything local on my machine here, and I can do the same kind of updates here when I say hello Toolbox 2, and if I click in a few seconds when it gets updated, it should be updating. It's not updating, of course. So let me try to restart. But that's the same kind of experience. So when you do the same experience that you get locally on your machine, you can get in the web running with C# hot reload and XAML hot reload. So let's try it again. Should be working this time. So if I do this, and then if I do, let's say 4 again, there you go. So
there we go.
The cool thing is that because you're in the web and you don't want to lose anything, then any kind of change that you made is reflected instantly on the other side. So see, I updated the app, and then if I change it, I don't save anything. I just type, and then it auto updates the app running. So that's one of the other cool things there. So if I click again, then I get my 5 updated
Cool.
in the app running. So yeah, pretty cool environment. And the fact that when you're on the web, that means that for someone that they want to review your code, then they can just move to your PR, open your PR inside of that environment. You don't have to do anything, and it just updates completely, and you don't have to install anything or validate anything. And the installation part that can be heavy for some persons that don't know about the environment, then everything's available.
So we had a couple people that I think showed up after we did the overview. So just once again, the 1 minute overview. What's the difference between Xamarin Forms, Maui, and Uno?
Well, I can take it.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Maui is the evolution of Xamarin Forms, right? It's essentially a re-architecture of Xamarin Forms to make it better on the existing platforms that it targets. It was a mobile first set of platforms that they were targeting. Now they're extending to Catalyst and others. Uno is taking a different approach. It's a single code base with XAML coming from one UI as opposed to being a custom XAML that targets pretty much all platforms out there, including Linux and on the web, to offer you a XAML plus C# single code base kind of approach to cross-platform development.
Cool. And then a newer question: does Uno support Tizen?
It does.
All right.
So last year, because we have a Skia backend, we're now able to run the Skia everywhere as well. So that's how we're supporting Linux today.
Okay. Cool.
So someone asked to zoom in, so I'm going to be zooming in.
I've also been playing around with doing that. So
yeah, so that's going to be better this way. So
okay.
So yeah, that's the type of updates that we've been doing. So that means that type of support is all about getting on the web using Codespaces and Gitpod. So that's the two online services that we do support, but also running on a Raspberry Pi. So recently, the support for ARM64 was added from OmniSharp. So that means that if you want to run VS Code and the Uno platform extension, you have to have OmniSharp 64 bits, ARM64, sorry, installed on your Raspberry Pi. It's something that's available as part of the preview bits. It's going to be out soon. My guess is that they added that originally for running on the Apple M1. devices that are ARM64. So that's one of the interesting things to run natively on those machines. And of course, we run on Mac and run on Linux natively. So there's no difference in environments, and even on Windows 7 for those who want to go running there.
And Robert, you had a question as to exactly what was Figma at the beginning. Now that some of the people just joined, I'm happy to show you. I'm sharing my screen, so you get a sense of how we're getting from a design document to actual XAML that you can put in your VS debug.
Okay.
So can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. So by shipping our Uno for Figma, we basically shipped two things. One is the design system itself. So as you'd be seeing here, like it's all of the WinUI components you can expect, like calendars and the checkboxes and the buttons and like the text entries and all that. And by using this to design your apps and providing this to your designer, you're providing basically the equivalent of your VS Toolbox with all the widgets you'd have in WinForms and WPF or in WinUI. Right? And once you have that, you can customize it to your brand. So you're able to come here, select a color palette that fits and matches your brand. And once you have that, we're even providing some app templates as to how you go about navigation between pages, like top bar navigation with navigation bar, or some of the new toolkit controls that we're providing, like the tab bar and all that. So you're able to quickly structure your pages. And I'll give you an example of a page like this. And because you've selected, as I showed you, like just to give you a sense of generation here, by selecting your primary and secondary colors, we're automatically generating the resource dictionaries to put in your XAML with your colors, right? Like here, I'm using a material design system, so I have primary color, secondary color with the X values. But the idea of this is you want to provide, as a developer targeting Uno as a platform, you want to provide immediate feedback to your designers as to what's possible and how their design would behave and would be responsive on an Uno app. So the way we've done that is because Uno targets the web with WebAssembly, we're able to run Uno in a browser within a Figma plugin here right now as our first proof of concept, if you wish. So now you have your Uno design on the left, and it's being rendered in real time on the right-hand side with actual data, right? So the way it works is that you have a JSON payload with design time data that you can enter, and it allows you to preview in real time what your app's going to look like. So this is an actual Uno app running as a WebAssembly app. So there's buttons there. I can click those buttons and see how the app behaves itself. But the beauty of this is behind this is all the XAML that we've generated. So this is all your XAML that you can then copy paste to the clipboard and copy into your VS code and our Visual Studio source code. And here you can see, for example, your tab bar and with tab bar items that have been generated. But we're also making sure, I was mentioning cross-cutting concerns, right? So how we're capable of dealing with all your challenges about localization and generating the UIDs and accessibility and generating all the automation properties and some of the extra modules that we've added as part of Uno 4. We came up with what we call MVUX, so MVU for XAML, which is a new presentation pattern that we've been introducing, which is like similar to MVU, but with all the benefits of data binding from a XAML standpoint. We've also introduced a new navigation set of patterns because people kept asking, how do I navigate between pages in a view model first world, right? So there's no strong guidance out there. So we did provide one.
And so this is a plugin plugging into what?
And to Figma. So Figma is the design tool. It runs on the web. So basically here is an Electron shell running the Figma design tool where you see all of your different pages of your app being designed. And now if you're looking at this, the same way you'd be looking at a design surface in VS or an Expression Blend or even like back in a design-led tool like Adobe XD, we're parsing this by using JavaScript interactions or an interrupt. We're able to parse this design document and generate all of the XAML on the fly automatically. And because we're able to parse that XAML, load it into a web browser, we're able to show a preview in real time as to how your design translates to a pixel perfect version in Uno.
So if I wanted to start playing around with this,
yes,
I need Figma. Do I have to get a certificate?
No, Figma is a free tool you can use. Just create an account, and then you
Okay.
download our UI library, our material component UI library, so that you get all these controls, right? What's like a floating action button and a flyout and icon buttons and whatever you need to drag into your design surface. And once
Okay.
you're like, and what the beauty of it, if I don't want to make a Figma demo today, but like as you're getting with buttons, for example, you get all of the variants of what a button should be, right? So in a design system, you might have your button as a primary or secondary color. It might have an icon or not. So look at this as your property grid as to how you would customize your design. But the value here is if you're adventurous as a developer or you have a designer creating your designs, you're able to bootstrap that process and fast track that process of generating automatically all of the XAML that is fully responsive. You can see auto layouts here. That is fully responsive and that uses all the best practice of how to integrate scroll viewers and data templates into a list view and everything you need for an app to work on WinUI and Uno. Right? So that's really the productivity boost here. And we've done some initial studies internally, like where we would spend over 2,000 hours building a mobile app of medium size. Because we're using that, we're able to cut down drastically on that number of hours by 90%, right? Because we're automatically generating all this, so there's no more analysis because there's less code to write, there's less QA, so it's a pretty powerful concept.
Very cool. And then you've got good documentation on your site on how to get started with this, I assume?
Yes, so Figma is still in preview, so we're gathering feedback on a daily basis.
Okay.
We're working closely. People are primarily communicating with us on our Discord channel to get live support from the community. But yes, that's where we're investing massively as part of preview to provide additional guidance as to how this works and gather additional feedback for sure.
Because I would think they could also use that as kind of a shortcut to moving over. So let's say I have a Xamarin Forms app, and I've done, well, let's say I do, because I actually do. So I know XAML. I've done all the variants of XAML, and I can easily move from one to the other. I've played with WinUI, but I wrote a Xamarin Forms app, and now I'd love to have the WebAssembly support. I'd love to play around with it in both places, but I don't necessarily want to take the time to finish learning all of WinUI or WinUI 3. And I've always, from the very beginning, wanted there to be a great designer. So I could start using Figma. So I get the best of both worlds. I get the designer, and then I don't have to, obviously, eventually I'll learn WinUI, but in the meantime, this is generating the WinUI. So it not only gives me the app, but then it gives me the opportunity to learn WinUI because I can compare that to the Xamarin Forms I already have. Is that legitimate?
It is a fair assessment. And obviously you can leverage, because it's all .NET 6, for example, you can leverage all of your business logic and app logic and just move to a new XAML, to a new flavor of XAML for sure.
Okay, cool. Very cool.
Yeah, it's an interesting the technical part of having Uno running inside of a browser that's hosted by Figma is technically interesting, because it's kind of a mishmash of technologies that blend quite well together. And the result that you get from what you get from the Figma visuals and runs inside of plugin is going to be looking the same when you're running into the app. It's not a different runtime or a different way of rendering thing. It's the exact same thing. So you get exactly what you see.
Right.
And it enables a variety of scenarios, right? We're leveraging that technology with multiple flavors. We've been using this for a long time for our playground, where you can test WinUI. You were mentioning about learning WinUI, right? If you go to Playground, the platform to Uno, this is a web version, a sandbox version of Uno running in a browser, where you can type whatever XAML, will parse it in runtime and show you the result directly. So it's a great way to learn about Uno.
I have that showing up right now on my screen. It's the so if people want to go and see the playground, that's exactly what it is. It's pretty much the same technology that's been there, and parsing some XAML and showing up the results. So if you want to see what a canvas does or what a button does, and then you can see all the results that are available there. You showing up what if you want to test out a calendar or a few other things like that. So it's what the playground is about, and it's the same technology that we're using instead of the Figma plugin.
And you can also, we're obviously using that web target also to enable what I was mentioning about our hot review scenario, right? So being like, it creates pretty powerful experiences if you're able to just have nothing to download and work and render directly in a web browser for sure.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
That's exactly that. So we were talking about all the themes that we had already. We have the material theming that's available. There's the Fluent theming that's provided by Microsoft, and there's also the Cupertino style that theme that's available. So you can choose in your application if you want to display one or the other, and get that to be used in your application.
And obviously, you can modify them to match your brand's colors and all that, right? You're really using those design systems as a foundation for you to tweak how your apps should look and look the same across all platforms. And that's the promise as to why we invested so much in porting WinUI to all the other platforms. It's just the power of that styling engine that separates all of the behaviors of your app from the actual look and feel of your app. So and that's what we call lookless control, right? With control templating and a rich styling engine, by having this, you're able to have multiple styles or design systems be applied as a skin, if you wish, to the same app structure that you have.
Cool.
I see that there was a question about the markup extensions.
Yeah, so Fuel Snable said, can I make my own bindings? WPF, I could create my own from Markup Extension. Oops, really useful, I found.
Yeah, exactly. So so we're following what WinUI is doing, and Markup Extension is something I'm not even sure. I'm not sure if it was included in the version, the WinApp SDK 1.0, or if it will be integrated in a future version. I'm not exactly sure, but Markup Extension is definitely something that the WinUI team has been looking at, and we're going to be following. So if it's available, we're going to be implementing that as well. So if you have scenarios where markup extensions are useful, and we definitely have many of those where the markup extensions can be used to alter the behavior of the XAML. That's definitely something that will be there.
And then Thomas asked about 3D stuff.
Yes, for sure. So it depends on the target. If you've seen, we were guests during a WinUI community call a while back. We could probably post the link at some point. I don't know, there's a Uno platform handle that's commenting on there, so probably can find that link. But we had a Kahua, a client of Uno, that is using 3.js, if I remember correctly, to show some 3D content instead of a WebAssembly app. But it's also available in the other targets. So if you're running on on iOS or Android, you can use OpenGL directly, or use I think it's Euro 3D, the binding that allows to do some 3D content directly from C#, or directly a let's say C++ component, if that's something that you can use. So yeah, it's definitely possible to use 3D content there.
And the way I look at this, because that same question applies to other technologies, right? Can you do this with Uno? Uno is really just a UI translation of a WinUI markup language or API contract onto other platforms. And behind the scene, these are all native apps on a per platform basis. So the real question is, can I do 3D on a native iOS app or a native Android app or in a browser? And if the answer is yes, you might not get a cross-platform 3D viewing experience, but you're still able to do platform-specific implementations in these cases where you need something that's not meant to be cross-platform per se, right? So if there's a player, a video player that you care about on some platforms that you want to target, you can still embed that just like in any other native app.
Cool.
Exactly. So there was a continued questions about markup extensions. I think it was the temperature binding path, my temp, that was mentioned in the chat. So that's
so he says
exactly
he'd be able to write his own bindings.
Exactly, and it's
there
definitely something that you want to investigate Xbind with. So I'm showing this on the screen currently. Xbind is able to do something like this, and it's something that was not available as part of WPF. But basically, what you can do is write an expression directly in the XAML. So, for instance, you can do things like this, and where let me zoom in a little bit. You can do things like this, like you write a method invocation from a color entry to whatever that does. And the interesting thing is that it's also something that allows you to do something that a lot of people are asking that are coming from WPF, which is multi-bindings. You can have a method here that has multiple parameters. So let's say if I want to do a concat method that takes 2 strings that are coming from 2 text boxes that I have above, I can do concat parameter 1, parameter 2. And if the mode is one way, then the function evaluation will be done every time one of the 2 parameters changes. So that's something that was not possible by, unless by writing a custom markup extension. But with WinUI, you don't need to do that. You can just use Xbind directly. I mean, yeah, you can definitely use your own bindings if you want, but just know that the feature is there and that you don't need to write your own bindings that way. Know also that performance-wise, it doesn't do any kind of reflection. It just uses the code that you wrote directly. So it's pretty low impact in terms of runtime.
Most people asking about complex bindings, I find, are coming from a WPF background, some are Silverlight background. And there was a great session. Darren May, who was once one of the speakers at UnoConf, has an entire session of just like all the gotchas and the recipes of porting WPF to a WinUI/Uno app. So it's a great session.
All of them, they all fit into one session.
The most important ones.
Must have been talking
the
fast.
most painful ones. Yeah. No, but he has great insights, so it's a really concise presentation.
All right, we got about 15 minutes, so let's see more.
Yeah, so I can talk about the .NET 6 support. So that one is one of the interesting things. So what we've been doing is adding support recently with the Visual Studio 2022 and the new extensions that were needed to be there. One of the good things about Visual Studio 2022 is that it's 64 bits, so you can handle larger apps without the IDE crashing or doing funky things. So that's one of the good things. And so we have a new extension. So people that are looking for that extension, make sure that you go to the extensions and search for Uno here. It's 2019 and 2022 are 2 different extensions. So make sure to search from Visual Studio 2022.
That's good to know.
Yeah, so in terms of the normal flow, it's something that from the documentation you will just follow through. But just so you know, it's there's a different extension for this. So you can search for this. And what we've done for 2022 is add support for .NET 6, the same technology that powers MAUI. So underneath, there's the support for .NET 6, iOS, Android, and Catalyst, and a few others. So you had .NET 6 Android, iOS, Catalyst, and macOS, and a few others that are not yet fully supported, if I remember correctly. And what we're doing here is give the ability to use .NET 6 Android and iOS as if it were a Xamarin iOS and Android, so not using Xamarin Form or anything else. So we're using this directly, and what that allows us to do with the new SDK style format that was not possible using Xamarin is that we could merge all those 4 targets into one project. So that means that we can reuse everything that the .NET team has been working on to get a cool integration inside of Visual Studio. So now you're able to select which target you want. So if you want to run for Android and iOS, macOS and Catalyst on Visual Studio are not supported for debugging, but they are for building. But let's say if you want to debug for Android, then you select Android, and then you're going to get your emulator available here. Same thing for iOS. So that's the .NET 6 support. That's pretty cool because it allows us to go farther in terms of performance and support for all the new cool things with C# 10 and all those features that developer want to use that they could not use with the Xamarin targets. And I'm pretty sure someone is going to ask, but why didn't you put all the other targets here, like GTK and WebAssembly and UWP or even WinUI for that matter, integrated into the mobile target. Well, it's the problem here is that we're separating by target frameworks, and we're separating per, let's say, iOS, Android, Catalyst, and macOS. And the problem here for WebAssembly is that WebAssembly is .NET 6, and it cannot be discriminated by target framework. So the Visual Studio IDE would be lost with the regard for the support for that. So for now, at this point, until .NET maybe 7 supports this, I would guess, if the ask comes in, we're still going to have a different set of projects for the other targets for now. So that's there. And if I start the app, I think it's going to be there. I wanted to test the application running there. So it's deploying on a Surface Duo emulator. So I don't know if the app started again here. Oh, the debugger failed at this point. So it's still in preview, just so you know. The Android support for everything, Android and iOS support is still in preview, and it follows what the Maui team is doing. So I don't know which preview they're at, but we're basically following this.
Yeah, Maui's not quite released, right? It's
exactly. And same for the iOS and Android support that's underneath that we also use. Okay. And their tooling is getting there. There are a few things that are every new version of Visual Studio improve things around. And I'm pretty sure that say Preview 2 is going to fix a bunch of things that will make the experience better.
Okay.
So
Jose has a question about binaries and AOT versus JIT.
Okay, so what can I do to compile the UNO binaries for Windows using AOT compilation? I want to check why the AOT binaries are bigger than JIT compilation. Well, AOT binaries are always going to be bigger than JIT compilation. So for many reasons, I'm not sure exactly what you're saying by JIT compilation, but let's assume that you're saying ready to run for .NET 6. So if you're using ready to run .NET 6, then the binaries are going to be using something that uses what is called stubs. So it's not completely AOT'd. It's going to be something that it's almost completely AOT'd, and that part is still smaller. So the JIT compilation is kind of AOT'd, but not completely, and it's smaller. But AOT completely, then that one is bigger but faster. So because there's no more JIT when you're doing AOT. So it really depends. So I'm not just sure if which AOT binaries you're talking about, but it's pretty similar. And when you're comparing whichever platform you're talking about, it's pretty similar with regards to how JIT and AOT do work. If it's for WebAssembly, there's no JIT, so it's going to be using the interpreter, and that one is a lot smaller because there's nothing to compile. It's just run, but the problem is that it's a bit slower. So it depends on the target.
Okay. All right.
So there's that. And the last thing is we talked about Surface Duo during the conference, and we worked with Craig from the Surface Duo team, and he contributed a new version of the support for let's say multi-screen devices. So we're talking about the Duo in this case, but if you have I've seen just today a 2 foldable device. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to work, but it's kind of wavy and stuff, so that's pretty interesting. But the idea is that we have here it's the sample app that we're using inside of UNO that allows us to have multi-screen support. So it's the 2-pane view. And the 2-pane view allows to display 2 contents. So that's the first content that's being displayed. And if I move that to be on 2 screens, then I'm going to have a second content that becomes available as part of that. And the interesting thing here is that the new API that was integrated by the Surface Duo team detects the location of the hinge here, so that the content is not overlapping with what's not visible. So that's pretty interesting because when you have a device like this in hand, you're going to see the there's really a hole in between the two screens. So if you put something there, then it's not going to be visible in any way. So in that way, you can change a few things here to see how the application is going to behave. But the idea is that when you have a two-screen device, you can with the two-pane view detect what should be displayed and in what way. So we can see here I'm changing the priority of the pane. Content 2 should be available in front. So that's the one that's displayed here. And if I move again to two screen, then the second content happens to be here. So I'll probably change the location of the content, but that's what happens there. So that's one cool thing. So we have contributors that are adding some really cool content to the Uno platform, and to follow the advances in hardware, and that's one of the cool thing that we saw during the UnoConf.
Cool.
So there's that. But I think there's another question about what's the difference between AOT binaries and native binaries. Well, they're both native in a sense. But let's say when we're saying native, let's say, for instance, if we take the support for Skia, for instance. So Skia is built in C++. So when we say native coming from .NET, that means that it's not using .NET. So it's not built from .NET code. So when we're talking about AOT, that means that we took some .NET code, so IL or C# compiled to IL, then compiled to machine code, but it's AOT compiled. So it's still some .NET code. It's for the OS, it looks like native code, but it's it's a terminology. So yeah, it's pretty much unmanaged code if you want to say exactly for native binaries. That would be the explanation between the two.
Okay. Still got time for more.
So what's your favorite announcement, Robert, so far?
Oh, my favorite announcement.
Why have we worked so hard, according to you?
I actually think the Figma stuff is my favorite announcement so far. It's kind of like the Holy Grail. So the idea of having a designer and then, being able to port an app from one place to another. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how it goes from Xamarin Forms to Maui, but, it'd also seems like a nice shortcut to be able to move over to Uno, and cut down a little bit on the learning curve of WinUI. I mean, I don't think it's going to wind up being that difficult, of course, but to be able to take an app and get it up and running sort of sooner while learning a designer at the same time seems really cool to me.
It's WinForms all over again.
I mean, Blend seemed like an amazing product, but oh my God, was it hard to learn and use.
Yeah, and it was 14 years ago, right? We actually counted the number of days between the Blend announcement and UnoConf for 4.0, and figured it was over 14 years. So they were probably too early, and that's something we said during the conferences. We're probably like over a decade too early with the concept, but the idea of being able to have something, look at it, and being able to generate all the code you need for it was the right idea in our book, at least. And that's a difficult, like if you're looking at it from a productivity standpoint, it's a difficult trade-off to figure out, because like you don't want to generate too much and be too opinionated about it, but you want to generate enough in enough cases where it makes sense and actually brings value. And that's probably like the best chance we had internally, being app builders first and foremost, being able to iterate through that and see what brought value to our designers and developers on a daily basis. And I think we've hit that best of both worlds kind of approach, right? Or that best compromise.
Right. So a quick question about multi-touch support, and then we'll get to Arlo's question.
It's there. Multi-touch support is there. It's even supported on the web. So if you have a multi-touch application and you want to detect, so it's all about going through the APIs that are pointer something. So pointer press, pointer released, pointer cancel. We even have the manipulation event support. So all of this is available. So you can detect your pointer IDs and make all your multi-touch support. So if maybe you have something specific that you want to talk about, but in general, it's the same behavior that you would find when doing multi-touch support in a WinUI or UWP application.
All right, and then Arlo, thank you. So this is all. You might think this was a plant, but it wasn't.
No, it wasn't.
Otherwise, I would have prepared for it.
But it was unbelievably timely. So thank you. In our remaining 2.5 minutes.
So he's probably asking because he just figured out like less than 24 hours ago that we also supported Wear OS, and you could build Uno apps for Wear OS as well. I saw his tweet about it. But like basically where we're going with Uno is now that we have a strong foundation in terms of like a UI framework that looks the same and behaves the same on all platforms, we're capable of investing in everything that we've shared, right? So maybe I can just, if I was to show the screen again, I'll give you a sense of our investments. Give me a second, I'll show. Right, so if you look at the announcements, now that we have a strong foundation and you're able to target all of the platforms at the bottom, and that we already have our themes, there's opportunities to create even more theme support. So Material U shipped their V3 of Material Design System, so we'll definitely support that. All of the extensions that we built with our reactive MVUX kind of extensions that facilitates state management in an app, that's clearly an area where we're going to invest more because we think there's a better way to build state or to deal with state management in your apps. We've also shipped navigation as an abstracted way to deal with all sorts of navigations, how to show prompts and dialogues and pick values in return value and navigate forward in a frame or navigate to a specific tab and highlight some UI. So there's a lot in there that needs to happen that we've already implemented as well. Toolkit, there's like we've shipped navigation bar, tab bar, we've shipped additional controls to support our responsive designs with auto layout, but there's opportunities to create even more controls that make sense in a cross-platform world. Obviously, our angle is always if we can contribute to the Community Toolkit first because it makes sense in a desktop scenario, we will contribute there, but in some cases it doesn't. So we've introduced the Uno Toolkit, and there's opportunities to do even more there. In terms of tooling, like everything Jerome showed with the XAML and C# hot reload, and the same thing with the code completion, there's edge cases where we can close even more gaps and bring productivity to all these other IDs even more. And finally, Figma, like I know it's your favorite, but it's just the beginning of it, right? Like the productivity boost we can get there, there's an opportunity to invest even more with a cross-cutting concern of performance all over the place and making sure we close as many gaps as possible, and that the promise of WinUI API contract being implemented 100% everywhere is as high as it can be in terms of closing the gaps and respecting that promise, right? So these are the areas where we'll continue to invest, but we have an open backlog. People can upvote issues, and that's how we've been contributing with the community for over 3 years now.
Great. And just quickly for people to get more information, show your website and where the docs are and whatnot.
Yeah, so if they go to platform.uno, maybe Jerome, you can share it, but
yes.
Platform.uno, you can hit the get started. There's the docs section there, but also get started that walks you through all the process of making sure your environment is proper with Uno check, and you get going from there. Choose your ID, your target platforms, and you can start right away. We have .NET new templates, obviously, to get you started.
All the targets there. I saw there was a question about answer about MVUX. So if you go to Uno Extensions, if it gets there, I thought I had that Uno Extensions. So you have the documentation here for Uno Extensions, and specifically when you go to all documentation for Uno Extensions here, you got a set of documentation here, and especially MVUX, it's available here as part of reactive.
And we'll be building more samples, and that's also how we're contributing to Uno in itself, right? Through documentation and more samples.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, thanks so much for coming on, guys. This is really cool stuff.
Always a pleasure, Robert. So looking forward to your Figma-based next Uno app.
Yeah. So is it you said it was in preview, but it's publicly available?
It's publicly available.
Okay.
All the links are on the website. You can use it for free. And we're gathering feedback, and you can come ask questions on our Discord server.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you guys. And thanks for the audience. Excellent questions.
Yes.
Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful end of year. Everybody relax, rest up. There's so much going on in the industry that we all need to take a couple of weeks to decompress or play around and then hit the ground running come the new year.
Enjoy
Thanks,
the holidays.
everybody. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.